Revenge with Karen.
The first sign this was going to spiral into corporate theater came when Connor, yes, that Connor, the VP's pride-soaked son, called me the headset lady in front of the board. I just spent 3 hours patching a multilingual teleconference system through a Singaporean firewall so the CFO could nod at French jokes in real time. The cables were still warm. My tea hadn't even steeped, and he waltzed in with his MBA breath and said, "Streamline that. She's just tech support, right? I've been the international systems liaison for 12 years, which means I've been ignored in 6 languages, underpaid in 4 currencies, and saved this company's ass across 3 continents. I don't wear a title that screams power. I wear flats I can run in and carry USB sticks like other women carry pepper spray. My job, making sure nobody accidentally insults a deputy minister's mother or formats a slide deck with red text in a morning culture. But you'd never know it from how Connor looked at me, like I was Alexa with a pulse. Connor showed up one Monday with slick hair, 0 experience, and a LinkedIn bio that read like an Axe body spray ad: global vision, scalable thinking, disruption enthusiast. His father, the VP of International Expansion, introduced him like he was the second coming of diplomacy. Connor's going to help us modernize our outreach. Translation: Connor was going to make a mess, and someone, probably me, was going to clean it. At our first strategy meeting, Connor sat at the head of the table and asked why we needed a full-time person just to help people feel comfy overseas. My knuckles whitened on the conference room coffee carafe. He'd already sunsetted a compliance analyst, merged 2 entire departments into one Slack channel, and replaced the international onboarding manual with a 3-page PDF titled Global Vibes. I wish I was kidding. When I spoke, he didn't look at me. He scrolled. When I sent notes, he replied with tea at checks. He once walked past me in the hallway and asked if I was from IT. I said no, I'm from the part of the org chart that stops you from getting internationally sued. Laughed like I'd told a joke. I hadn't. And look, I get it, I'm not shiny. I don't speak in buzzwords. My last PowerPoint had no animation, just bullet points and 2 maps. But I do speak Mandarin, Russian, Arabic, Spanish, and 2 dialects of Pashto, which Connor once called those cave languages. He giggled. I didn't, so I watched. I documented. Didn't correct him when he said namaste at a Turkish business dinner, or used chopsticks upside down in Seoul. I stopped saving him. That's the hardest part of being invisible. You're usually the one holding the safety net. But eventually, even the quiet ones decide to let someone fall. And hey, if you're into stories where the woman in the background turns out to be the one pulling every string, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Maybe even tap like while you're at it. Small team, and every bit of support helps us keep unmasking the Connors of the world. Anyway, Connor's big moment came with the announcement of a transformational partnership with a ministry overseas, one with fragile politics and a memory like an elephant's grudge. I'd handled them before, delicately, discreetly. But Connor intercepted the invite, claimed it as his strategic debut, and told the board I could support from the side. He didn't know that 5 years ago, I'd quietly prevented a diplomatic fallout during a data breach involving their education ministry. Or that they'd specifically requested me, by name, without realizing I'd been shoved off the roster. But Connor, he was too busy rehearsing his pitch deck in the mirror, practicing phrases he'd found on Reddit threads like global synergy and frictionless onboarding. What he didn't rehearse was what to do when the delegation started speaking in a language not found on any app, and one that I happened to speak better than my own mother tongue. And that, friends, is when the show began. The first thing Connor did after printing business cards that said Global Strategy Director was fire the translator in Berlin. We'll just use the AI one, he said, waving his phone like it was Mose's staff. Never mind that the AI one once translated shipping delays as death threats during a product recall in Osaka. Context doesn't matter when your entire worldview is shaped by a podcast about hustle culture. He started with a slide deck. Always a damn slide deck. It was titled Fixing Global Redundancy, and his cursor hovered over my job title like a vulture circling roadkill. We've got too many roles doing the same thing. Karen, for example, is listed on 6 projects across 5 time zones. That's not scalable. I didn't say anything. I just watched him unthread the exact net I'd spent 12 years weaving. He called it streamlining. I called it what it was, cutting the brakes off a car because the pedals were too complicated. He removed me from the APAC coordination channel. Then the EMEA update calls. Then from the weekly briefings with the South American regional team. One by one, vanished from the very networks I'd built. I found out I'd been dropped from a crucial call with the Malaysian regulatory team when I logged in and saw a Zoom room full of unfamiliar faces, and Connor grinning like he'd solved world peace with a pivot table. "This is the future," he said afterward. "You can focus on whatever you do." "I kept the Lahore office from getting raided last year," I said quietly. He blinked. "Was that you?" "No, Connor. It was the headset fairy." At meetings, talk over people with alarming confidence, throwing around phrases like cultural efficiency and localized uniformity, which don't actually mean anything but sound impressive when you say them fast enough. During a planning session with our partners in Cairo, he called their holiday calendar a bit of a bottleneck. The room fell silent. Then someone on the Egyptian side muted themselves and never unmuted again. I pulled him aside after that one. "Connor," I said, "that's a national day of mourning. You might want to be careful how you phrase things." He smirked. "I don't do phrasing. I do results. You fix the audio. I'll fix the world. Cool, great. Nothing like mansplaining diplomacy to someone who once negotiated a satellite license during a coup. The fallout started as tremors. A delayed sign-off here. A cryptic we'll revisit next quarter there." The Japan office stopped replying in full sentences. Brazilians began copying only legal on replies. Connor took this as progress. "They're just adjusting to the new tempo," he said. That tempo was a slow bleed. He didn't notice that the Lagos team had quietly duplicated their data backups into a private drive, or that the Mumbai office began holding their own project reviews without HQ. He didn't realize that removing people like me from high-level calls was like trying to do surgery with mittens on. Can poke around, but eventually you're going to hit something vital. So I documented every meeting, every streamlining slide, every time he misnamed a partner or replied "sounds good" to a threat-laced email written in formal Chinese. I didn't intervene. I stopped being a buffer. I stopped being the whisper in the corner who saved his pride in 4 dialects. Because the thing about being invisible is, no one sees you until it's too late. And Connor was sprinting toward the edge of a cliff, arms wide, convinced it was a runway. The day I stopped saving Connor was the day he called my insights cute. Not wrong, not outdated. Cute. We were reviewing a draft for the delegation from the Ministry of Educational Technologies, a ministry that, on paper, looked like a run-of-the-mill agency, but in reality had the power to fast-track or blackball every one of our products across an entire continent. Been working on that relationship for nearly a decade, threading nuance through political transitions, changing dialects, and 2 health ministers with wildly different views on Western tech firms. One allergic to outsiders, the other allergic to metaphors. I knew what words to use, and more importantly, which ones not to. Connor glanced at my annotated notes, months of work, layered with cultural footnotes, and suggested phrasing drawn from cabinet-level conversations, and smiled like I'd just handed him a Pinterest board. "Yeah, this is cute," he said, setting the folder down and opening his laptop. "But I've got a better vibe in mind. We need something punchy, something that slaps." He used the word slaps, about diplomatic language, for government agency that still used wax seals on official letters, so I made a decision. Not publicly, not with fireworks or a monologue. Just a quiet recalibration behind the eyes, kind you only notice if you've been watching me long enough to know what silence means. I was done shielding him, done filtering his arrogance through layers of grace. From that moment on, I would not be his parachute. I would let the air thin and the fall teach him everything I no longer cared to. Instead, I focused on Layla, my junior liaison. Sharp, curious, unflinchingly precise. I'd been training her casually, but now I stepped it up, gave her access to my reference files. Walked her through the unwritten rules, the customs not in any handbook, the tone you take with a bureaucrat whose son married into a rival party. We met in the quiet corners of the office between meetings, speaking softly over lukewarm tea and second-hand desks. Meanwhile, I began consolidating my archives. Thousands of emails, call transcripts, annotated glossaries of terms that, when misused, could collapse an entire launch. I backed them up, encrypted the drive, and stored the master key offline. Not because I planned to disappear, but because I knew soon the people in charge would need a map back to reality. And it wouldn't come from Connor's color-coded pie charts. Then came the invitation. An official delegation from the ministry itself, 3 senior officials and a translator who, unbeknownst to Connor, wasn't a translator at all, but a policy auditor trained to detect insincerity across tonal shifts. They were sending their A-team. The invitation was addressed to my office. Not to me, not directly, but routed through the network I'd helped design. It sat in my inbox for less than 4 minutes before Connor burst into my workspace with a grin so smug it needed subtitles. "I'll take it from here," he said. "This is my shot." The executive board met the next day, pitched himself as the face of modern strategy, said it was time to transition out of legacy relationships and make an impression that reflects our new direction. I sat 2 seats down, watching the room nod along like bobbleheads dipped in ignorance. The chair finally looked at me and said, "We'd like you to support from the side, Karen. Make sure the tech runs smooth." I smiled, of course. I've seen real arrogance before. Government arrogance. Institutional arrogance, the kind that comes with brass pins and private elevators. But Connor's was something purer. An uncut stone of self-belief, untouched by consequences. And yet, I didn't feel rage. Not anymore. I felt focus. Sharp, surgical clarity. The kind I only feel when I'm seconds from correcting a crisis midair. Kind I felt in Jakarta when our regional manager disappeared, and I had to negotiate directly with the deputy minister, using a burner phone and 4 proverbs. The thing about a storm is, you don't raise your voice. You just prepare your footing. So I prepared. I printed copies of the ministry's last 5 communiques and marked the phrases they used to signal disapproval. I reviewed my prior briefs and reminded myself what each minister found offensive. One hated lateness, the other hated compliments. I noted Connor's vibe deck used red fonts and a Western calendar. I packed a scarf from the last delegation dinner where we toasted in silence, because silence, in their custom, was gratitude. I wasn't going to save him. I was going to be standing in the room when he set fire to the bridge, and then, calmly, I would walk across the smoke. They arrived in silence. 3 black SUVs pulled into the circular drive, no flags, no logos, just the understated choreography of real power. The type that doesn't announce itself with badge lanyards and hashtags. Connor adjusted his cuffs like he was about to meet a startup founder with 1 billion followers. He kept checking his reflection in the chrome door handles, muttering something about owning the room. I sipped my tea, already lukewarm, and noted the lack of usual aides. No junior staffers. No comms team. Only senior officials. 2 of them I recognized from past economic summits. The third, he wasn't on the original itinerary. He was the Deputy Minister of International Standards, an old-school diplomat known for his disdain for tech evangelists and his terrifying poker face. The room was staged like a startup's idea of diplomacy. Modern art on the walls, artisanal water bottles, ambient synth music playing, just loud enough to be a cultural insult, in 3 languages. Connor stepped forward to greet them, arms wide, grinning like a boy who'd stolen his dad's tie. He misidentified the deputy minister as a translator. Shook his hand and said, "Can you let the real guys know I'm ready?" I swear I heard the temperature drop. No one corrected him, not with words. Just a glance from one of the officials to another. Noted, logged, stored. Connor didn't even see it. He led them into the conference room, too fast, too loud, clicked the wireless remote with all the subtlety of a game show host. The pitch deck launched on the wall, bright colors, bullet points, icons, flags, wrong ones. The national flag was inverted. Another slide used the flag of a rival province, one still in a tense negotiation with the very ministry these men represented. Then came the tagline in their language, meant to say partner in progress. It said, roughly, master of your transformation. One official blinked twice. That's all. Another's eyebrow twitched upward, almost imperceptibly. But to someone who speaks the language, not just the words, but the culture, the posture, the subtext, it was thunder. Connor plowed ahead. Our vision, he said, is to empower your modernization, Western style. We'll give you the framework to catch up to global markets. I could have slapped him with a dictionary. The deputy minister leaned back slightly, whispered something to the man on his left. They switched into a dialect, not the formal state language used in most documentation, but a regional tongue I hadn't heard spoken since the Jakarta summit years ago. Connor, of course, didn't even register it. He just kept flipping slides. But I understood every word. "This is the one they sent," the deputy murmured. "The woman was listed before," the aide responded. "She is here. Why is she not speaking? She has not been invited," they paused. The third leaned in. This is dangerous. Kept my eyes on my tea. Didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Just listened. Connor, blissfully unaware, wrapped up the presentation with a flourish. And that's the new future for your country's educational rollout. Questions? The deputy minister simply said, "Let us take a moment," and stood. They walked to the windows, looking out at the skyline, not speaking, just letting the silence grow roots in the room. Connor leaned toward me, whispering, "They're just overwhelmed. Wait till they see the investor projections." I didn't respond. He didn't notice, but I noticed everything. The way they shifted into a tighter huddle, the way their tone darkened, not aggressive, not emotional, just final. Something was happening, not performative, not for show. A decision was forming, one that no pitch deck could unpitch. Connor smiled at his phone, probably texting someone about how well it was going. And I sat there, sipping my cooling tea, letting the storm gather without warning him. Because sometimes silence isn't awkward. It's judgment in progress. Dinner was held in the rooftop ballroom of the company's preferred 5-star hotel, the kind of place that reeks of florals and corporate hubris. Crystal chandeliers, linen napkins folded like origami birds, and a quartet playing something so generic it might have been AI-generated Bach. Connor arrived 10 minutes late, flashing teeth and confidence like they were currency. He wore a jacket 2 shades too bright and carried himself like a man preparing to accept an award he'd forged himself. The delegation was already seated, not a smile among them. Their suits were darker, more conservative than the local executives. The lead delegate, Deputy Minister Ramani, sat in the center like a granite statue. I recognized his posture. It was the same one I'd seen years ago in Jakarta, right before he torpedoed a British telecom deal with one sentence. Connor mistook the silence for opportunity. He strutted up to the table, gave a slight bow, wrong culture, wrong gesture, and tried to break the ice. "Sabar malam," he said confidently, raising his wine glass. I choked on my water. He meant selamat malam, a respectful good evening. What he said, mangled in pitch and pronunciation, was closer to patience, night. The youngest delegate blinked. Others remained still. But I caught it, the subtle twitch of Ramani's left hand as he set down his fork, and the glance exchanged with his aide. Connor took their silence as reverence. "Means cheers," he added. It did not. The translator, who I knew wasn't a translator, smiled politely and said, "Interesting choice of phrase." Connor laughed and elbowed the CFO beside him. "Told you I'd studied up." When it came time for introductions, MC read from the list with practiced indifference. Deputy Minister Ramani, Advisor Nur, Minister of Technological Affairs, Salam then, without pause, and from our side, Connor Beckett, Global Strategy Director, and assisting him, Karen Lin, Technical Systems Liaison. Technical Systems Liaison, not a lie, but not the truth either. As I stood and gave the expected shallow nod, Ramani looked up from his soup. His eyes met mine. And in that brief second, something flickered, recognition. He said nothing. Just offered a single nod, deeper, more deliberate than decorum demanded. I returned it, no smile, just acknowledgement, like 2 people at a funeral who remember a different version of the deceased. Connor didn't see it. He was too busy explaining to one of the ministers how our cloud rollout would disrupt outdated learning mindsets. He used the word primitive. Twice. I stayed through dessert, long enough to see one delegate push aside his plate untouched, long enough to watch Ramani excuse himself early, citing early meetings. No one from the ministry touched the wine. Back in my hotel room, I peeled off my blazer and let the silence settle. The kind that buzzes in your ears after too much restraint. I opened the minibar, grabbed the overpriced bottled water, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at the skyline, wondering how many versions of disaster could unfold before morning. Then I opened the encrypted drive. My files were still intact. Timelines, transcripts, annotated cultural briefings, a full alternative proposal with accurate protocol and risk management for every rollout phase. I wasn't planning to use it, not unless the ship started sinking through the floor. But tonight, the floorboards creaked. I drafted an email to the chairman of the board. Subject line, in case clarity is needed tomorrow. No accusations, no drama, just facts, misidentifications, linguistic missteps, diplomatic breaches, and a complete backup plan ready to deploy with or without Connor's involvement. I didn't send it, not yet. Just saved it to drafts and encrypted the attachments a second time. Because some storms don't need chasing. They just need a witness with an umbrella and the nerve to wait. The final negotiation meeting was was held in the main conference suite of our headquarters, the same glass-walled, echo-prone showroom they used for media walkthroughs and executive photo ops. Everything was engineered to impress. Polished oak table, filtered daylight pouring in through floor-to-ceiling windows, framed awards no one in the company remembered earning. The centerpiece was a projector setup Connor had insisted on, same one that had crashed twice during his Visions Summit last quarter. I arrived 15 minutes early, just like I had for every international negotiation over the past 12 years. It was habit, not hope. Connor was already there, barking orders into a Bluetooth headset and scowling at a digital presentation like it had personally betrayed him. When he saw me walk in, he didn't smile. He waved me off like a hotel bellhop. "Karen," he said, "can hang back. This is executive level now." I looked past him to the delegation's folders already laid out, each with their names, correct spellings, incorrect titles. I glanced once at the handouts. The word collaboration had been mistranslated into something that read closer to authorized supervision. "This isn't a demo call," I said quietly. "They're expecting full parity." He tapped the screen and shook his head. "I've got it. Let's not confuse the hierarchy. Stay close in case something glitches." I stayed, just not in the way he meant. I stepped out into the adjoining observation room, where a one-way window looked into the boardroom, and a side monitor displayed the live meeting feed. A technician handed me a spare headset. "I'll be in the AV booth," he muttered. "Let me know if he nukes the HDMI again." Through the glass, the delegation entered, silent, stone-faced. Their demeanor hadn't thawed since the welcome dinner. Deputy Minister Ramani led the group, placing his binder down with a thud that somehow managed to sound judicial. They didn't sit immediately. Connor motioned them in with the casual air of a man who'd never been in a room where power wore a different flag. "Glad you could join us. Let's keep this productive. No opening ceremony, no pleasantries, straight to the pitch." Slide 1 launched, a bar graph comparing adoption rates across countries. The bottom of the graph, highlighted in red, was labeled with the delegation's country. Beneath it, in all caps, "Time to modernize." Connor began narrating. "We know your education system has struggled with outdated tools. Our platform offers scalable efficiency." He said struggled like he was diagnosing a disease. He said you're like they weren't in the room. Slide 2. A breakdown of language modules for students. He casually mentioned, "We'll localize English content first. Phase in native dialects once baseline literacy is stabilized." Ramani's hand tightened into a fist. Connor, oblivious, added, "We understand your students are coming from a more developing framework, so we've simplified the onboarding." Developing framework, like he was talking about a rescue mission, not a sovereign country with Nobel winners in mathematics. The room stiffened. Not a breath moved. Then Ramani said something quietly to his colleagues. Didn't switch to the standard national language. They switched to a regional dialect, old, fast, full of honorifics and grammatical traps. It was like switching from Oxford English to Victorian courtroom Latin. Not taught in textbooks, not in language apps, definitely not in Connor's prep folder. Connor stared blankly. One aide asked a question directly to him. His eyes widened. He laughed nervously. "Could you, say that again slower?" They didn't. They said it faster. Other delegate leaned forward. "Your terms, are they flexible or imposed?" Connor froze. "I'm sorry, let me just check something." He pulled out his phone. Google Translate. Deputy Minister Ramani's lips pressed into a thin line of contempt. Connor fumbled with the app, tapping his screen like a child trying to rewind a cartoon. The screen flashed gibberish. He glanced helplessly toward the tech window, and I stepped inside. The room didn't turn. It settled. I walked in slowly, with the practiced calm of someone who knew which words held weight and which ones could cause wars. "May I?" asked softly. Ramani turned to me, and his face didn't soften, but it stilled. Recognition again. Not fondness, not forgiveness, but something closer to respect. Connor blinked. "Karen, this is..." I didn't look at him. I addressed Ramani directly in his language. Not just the dialect, but the tone, the cadence, honorifics that acknowledged every layer of his title. I greeted the others by name, referencing details only someone with institutional memory and real attention would know. The school one had graduated from. The ministerial program another had piloted. Then I turned to the aide. The question, if I understood, I said, still in their tongue, was whether our terms are negotiable or prescriptive. Ramani gave the smallest of nods. I looked at Connor now. His eyes were wide, mouth slightly open. "The answer," I said, "is flexible, if we still hope to proceed." The moment I spoke, the room held its breath. Formal dialect, razor precise, not conversational, not showy. Just clean, correct, and anchored in every syllable the delegation had grown up hearing from their grandparents, not their government. The cadence of old diplomacy. The kind that doesn't ask for attention, it commands it. Deputy Minister Ramani didn't smile, simply turned his head, just enough to glance at the others. The smallest shift, yet it cracked the veneer of tension in the room. The Minister of Technological Affairs, Salim, leaned slightly toward Ramani and whispered, just loud enough for me to catch. She was the one in Jakarta. The data breach. She stayed. I didn't respond, not to that. Just offered a soft nod of acknowledgement and continued. There's been a misunderstanding, I said gently. Phrasing in the deck referred to standard market growth curves, not your educational infrastructure. I apologize for the misinterpretation. I didn't look at Connor. I let him sit in the shadow of his own ignorance while I unraveled the knots he had tied. Slide by slide, I walked through the mistranslations. I reframed the proposal, not as guidance from the West, but as mutual adaptation. I referenced their national strategy documents, not yet published in English. I asked clarifying questions in their language, allowing them to control the pace. I made space, real space, and in doing so, they began to breathe again. By the time I reached the final clause, the one Connor had butchered with his framework for developmental parity, I reworded it as a shared initiative based on local curriculum structures and their own existing teacher networks. Not a rescue mission, a handshake. Ramani sat still, leaned back, hands folded over his stomach like a king receiving tribute. Finally, he said in English, his voice low and exact, someone who understands. The room stayed quiet, then chairs shifted, not dramatically, just slightly, but toward me. The attention realigned, the center of gravity no longer tethered to the man in the blazer and buzzwords. The board members seated in the back, watching via the observation panel, began whispering. I saw one lean into the ear of another, lips tight. A few phones lit up. Notes were being passed, screenshots probably, maybe even a live message to the chairman. I didn't move to take over. I simply paused, let the weight of what had just occurred land where it needed to. Connor was frozen beside me, his face stuck in an expression that couldn't decide between offense and confusion. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Ramani, then at me, and at the empty space where authority used to sit. You didn't tell me you spoke it like that, he mumbled under his breath. You never asked, I replied without turning. Ramani tapped the table softly. I would like her seated for the rest of this conversation, he said. Not a request, not a question, an instruction. Connor opened his mouth again, but the Minister of Technological Affairs beat him to it. She represents the company, yes, I turned. Met Connor's eyes, pulled out a chair and sat down. Yes, I said, I do. When the final slide faded to black and the room exhaled its first full breath in an hour, Deputy Minister Ramani leaned forward and said, now, we would like a private moment. The request wasn't unusual in tone, but it was surgical in its precision. Every eye in the room turned, subtly, toward Connor, who blinked like someone waking up mid-free fall. Of course, Connor said quickly, halfway out of his seat. I'll just step out for a sec and let you. Ramani raised a hand, the gesture elegant and absolute. With her, he said, nodding toward me. Only her. The silence that followed was colder than the A/C could explain. The boardroom paused in collective discomfort. Somewhere behind the glass, I could see our general counsel stiffen in her seat. The CFO looked toward the CEO's proxy, like a dog waiting for permission to bark. Connor laughed nervously. Must be a miscommunication. Karen's in systems. We are not confused, Ramani said, cutting him off like a guillotine. We will speak with Miss Lin. Alone, that word, alone. Connor tried to hold his smile, but it buckled at the edges. The board chair, an older man who'd been quiet most of the meeting, finally spoke. Let's give them the room. Chairs scraped. Side conversations hummed. Connor stood frozen, then was nudged gently by the legal director, whispered something that probably translated to don't die on this hill. The room cleared, and the door closed with a finality that didn't need a lock to feel sealed. It was just me and the delegation now. Ramani turned to me. You saved face without humiliating your colleague. That was generous. I didn't do it for him, I said softly. I did it for the deal. He studied me for a long moment, then opened the binder on the table, the one I'd seen but hadn't touched. Inside, drafts of the agreement annotated in handwriting that wasn't theirs. My notes, from 3 months ago. You've been preparing for this long before he knew it was coming, Ramani said. I was preparing for the possibility that we'd still be respected, I said, even if we weren't led well. That earned a whisper of a smile. Salim, the Minister of Technological Affairs, slid a printed copy of my alternate proposal across the table, complete with technical specs, cultural protocols, education alignment benchmarks, and the rollout risk matrix no one had asked for. Until now. We've reviewed your version, he said. It is what we hoped for when we agreed to fly here. And the company, we are willing to proceed, Ramani said, under one condition. I didn't move. She must lead the implementation, he said, enunciating each word, or there is no deal. He placed a pen beside the agreement. Do you accept? Wasn't a trick question. I nodded once, picked up the pen, signed my name where his assistant had marked it, next to the line that said primary point of contact, Karen Lynn. The three men signed silently, with practiced precision. Then Ramani stood, buttoned his jacket, and handed me the agreement. I suggest you deliver this personally, he said, his eyes flicking toward the frosted glass of the observation window. And make sure you are seated at the table moving forward. I walked back into the main boardroom like nothing had happened, but everything had. Connor looked up as I entered, his posture tight, jaw clenched. The rest of the room quieted. I placed the signed agreement in front of the board chair. His hands hovered over the paper like it might bite. What's this? He asked. Your deal, I said, signed and binding, with one clause you should be aware of. He flipped to the final page. His eyes scanned the line that mattered most. His mouth opened and closed. He looked up at me. Then, without a word, turned to Connor, who hadn't yet realized the floor beneath him had been surgically removed. The boardroom was silent in that thick, suffocating way that only happens when the last illusion finally snaps. Connor was still staring at the agreement like it had morphed into a foreign language, when he couldn't bluff his way through this time. The signatures were real. The ink was fresh. And his name wasn't on any of it. Deputy Minister Ramani didn't sit. He remained standing at the head of the table, straight-backed, hands folded behind him like a general addressing the losing side of a war. He looked around the room, then rested his gaze on Connor. You, he said clearly, are not qualified. Connor flinched, almost laughed as if expecting someone to jump in, explain the misunderstanding, save face. But no one moved. The board didn't shift. No one even exhaled. Ramani continued. Your conduct was dismissive, your language condescending, your understanding non-existent. You do not speak for your company. You do not speak for this deal. Then he turned slowly to me. But she does, he said. She is the reason this company has access to our trust. There was a long pause, just long enough for the shame to fully settle. The board chair, stoic, unreadable, cleared his throat. His voice was low and clipped, like he'd already rehearsed the words in his head. Effective immediately, Connor, he said. You're done. Connor's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. He looked to his father's empty seat as if someone might burst in, call time out, hit undo. But the only sound was the gentle hum of the AC vent overhead and the quiet scribble of someone in legal noting the decision down in her leather binder. I didn't move. Not yet. Ramani turned to the board, gave a curt nod, and said, We will proceed as agreed. Our team looks forward to working under Miss Lynn's leadership. Then, with that same unwavering dignity, he turned and exited the room, his delegation flowing behind him like a silent tide pulling away from the wreckage. I gathered my folder, no rush, no drama, just calm, methodical closure. Connor still hadn't moved. I walked past him without looking. But at the door I paused, turned just enough to meet his eyes, wide, lost, and finally fully aware. Next time, I said quietly, learn who's really running the show. Then I walked out. The door clicked behind me, and for the first time in 12 years, I felt the weight of being seen, not just tolerated, not just used, but recognized, settle into my spine like a crown no one could strip. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.